This is a tutorial class on how to scratch build a chassis. We've got our basic chassis building jig. The first thing we're going to do is put our pins in that will locate the rear axle. So we're going to plug these in here, get them set up. Alright, now we're building a VRAA chassis for Lim in Kuala Lumpur, and we're going to build this to a 90-inch wheelbase. Up the side of our jig, our front axle locating holes, actually each pair advances a 32nd of an inch, which conveniently works out to be 1 scale inch since the cars are 1/32 scale. Alright, so since we're going to build this car to a 90-inch wheelbase, we're just going to look at our numbers up the side. So here's the 70-inch wheelbase, the 80-inch wheelbase. So our 90-inch wheelbase is going to put our pins right here. Basically, each row is a 5-inch increment on your wheelbase. So if you wanted to build a 91-inch wheelbase, you'd just use the next set of holes up. But I don't know if you can see it on the video or not, but every other set of rows is marked 70 inches, 80 inches, 90, 100, all the way up to 120. Now, in this case though, on this jig, and I'll just throw this out there right now, but we're not going to be using that feature, we also have a set of holes for the rear axle that'll shift the axle back a 64th of an inch, which again is conveniently 1/2 an inch in 1/32 scale. So with this jig, you can actually build to within a 1/2 inch scale of the wheelbase you'd like to build. Alright, we're going to be using slotted spherical bushings to support the rear axle. Now if you take anything from this video, the most important thing to know is that you need clean material. So when you're working with your copper tube, sand it with either sandpaper or an abrasive pad. On your wire that you're going to use to build the car itself, there's a piece. You need to sand it too. You need this stuff clean, because if it's not clean, the solder will not stick, your chassis will fall apart, your solder joints will be all ugly, and it won't stay together. I'm going to take my handy dandy little Dremel tool with a sanding wheel on it. I'm just going to do nothing but clean up these bushings real fast so that we are sure our solder will stick nice and well to our... Okay, this is the rear axle we're going to use on our jig. Now, because we're working with these small bushings, we're going to have a possibility that as we solder them, that solder would flow onto our axle. Normally you'd use a piece of steel for your axle, and we're actually going to use this piece for our front axle. But in this case, because we have the potential to solder our axle into our bushings, this is actually a simple 3/32 OD piece of aluminum with a piece of wire inserted into the inside to give it some strength. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is just take my pencil, and we're going to put a little graphite essentially on this piece of axle so that way it also will help to prevent the solder from sticking to it. So a handy dandy trick Wayner has taught me, along with basically everything I'm doing here. Everything you're going to see has been taught to me by Moose. Alright, so we're going to slip on our build wheels. Now these will, depending on the size of the wheels you're building in the car, wheels got shorter or lower as the cars became newer. You go back to your 30s and 20s design, the tires are pretty tall. Some of them have wheels that are 21 inches in diameter. So the size of the build wheels you're going to use is going to be dependent on what size wheel you're building, how much ground clearance you're going to need. It's a little more than we want to cover today. Hopefully Moose will do something with that for us. But at any rate, so I've slipped on the build wheels we're going to use onto our aluminum axle. You may be able to see it here. We've got our slotted spherical bushings or bearings on there. And now we're going to put our front axle together. Now, this is important, and you're going to need a bunch of these. This is simply a 3/32 inch collet that is normally used, and you can get them at radio control shops, but I think those guys use them to hold the wheels on their radio control airplanes. We're going to use that since 3/32 is the diameter of our axle. That's going to be used to help locate things in the front here. So let me get that put all together, and we'll come back and I'll explain what I did and what. Before we go that far though, this piece of brass tubing is going to be what supports our front axle. Now, it's already been cut to length. The car we're building, you have a maximum of 50 millimeters width overall on the wheels. And the wheels we have chosen, and we've chosen wheels that are the widest that you could possibly use on this car. These wheels are 9.5 millimeters wide. So wheel on either side gives us 18 millimeters. We've got a maximum of 50 millimeters wide, so we've simply subtracted the 18 millimeters and have ended up with a 32 millimeter tube. Now, once you build this, it's going to be difficult, if necessary, to cut this tube narrower so that if you overbuild it and your wheels won't get within the rules that are constraining the build of this particular chassis, it's difficult to come back and cut that piece of brass tubing to length. So I recommend you end up short. Actually make this a little shorter than you feel is necessary, because you can always put on axle spacers used to locate rear axles on cars. You can put those on there and space your wheels out then to where they need to be. So it's a lot easier to shim the front wheels to where you want them than trying to come back and cut this tube to the length you really need it. Now, I've already cut it to length, but I haven't cleaned it up. So I'm going to take my Dremel tool and just kind of square up the burr that was on the end, and kind of touch it here, give it a little spin to put a slight bevel on the outside. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife, just run that around the inside and remove any burr that would be on the inside of the tube. Okay, what we've done right now is pushed our wheels up against our rear axle post, tighten the set screws so that now this axle is located, can't move in any direction. Done the same in the front on our build wheels. I've tightened the Allen screws, so we've got the axle located. Wheels have been pushed up, in this case, against the inside of the front axle post. Now what we need to do is locate the front axle. We've got two 1/32 inch collets on here, and basically what you do to start is just eyeball it. Kind of line it up to where it looks like it's centered, and just snug down the two set screws on the collet. Right now what we're going to do is simply take our micrometer, and we want to make sure that we've got this spot in the center. So I'm just going to take it, and you can measure off of really any point. It's just going to be the same point on either side, you know, depending on what kind of configuration you end up to hold your axle in place. You may be measuring off the inside of the wheel. In this case though, I'm going to measure off the inside of the hub and the edge of my collet. And I've got about 7.25 millimeters there, and I am 8.75 millimeters there. So we're off about 1.5 millimeters. So I'm simply going to loosen our collet, kind of eyeball it, move it over to what looks to be about 1.5 millimeters. Snug that collet down, loosen this collet, push it that way, so we've shifted it that way, hopefully about 1.5 millimeters, and, or I'm sorry, 3/4 of a millimeter. Our difference was 1.5 millimeters. All right, we're now 7.7 millimeters here, and 8.3. All right, keep moving. All right, so basically though, I think you get the gist of it. What we're going to do is just keep shifting these collets around till we get an equal measurement between the collet and the wheels. That way we know that our front axle tube is on the center line of our chassis jig.